I think it's about time for us to begin. If you'll come on in and have a seat. So if you've not been with us the last few weeks, we've been studying the book of 1 Samuel. Alan Pettit and I alternate each week. Alan taught last week, so I'm teaching this week. We're going to be in the chapters 14 and 15 today, if you want to be turning in your Bible there. I'll have the scriptures on the screen as well as we read through those. A couple of weeks ago when I taught, we had 5 chapters to cover, and that was pretty tough. We only have 2 to cover today, but they are fairly long chapters. But I think we could get through those a little easier than a couple of weeks ago. So welcome to the class. Especially thankful for those that are watching online. We appreciate your participation as well. Today's lesson is chapters 14 and 15. There are 3 major lessons. We'll talk about some specific, more granular lessons as well, but 3 overarching lessons from the book. Faith in God brings victory, foolish words bring trouble, and disobedience and deception bring judgment. So to catch you up where we are, we're talking mostly about Saul. Saul has been made king. He has, even though despite the fact that he's rejecting God and the Israelites are rejecting God, God agrees to allow them to have a king. And Samuel, the prophet, the judge, the priest, anoints him as king, and he begins his reign. And so we're kind of getting early in his reign as king here in these 2 chapters. Let's read chapter 14 first. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side," but he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree in Mignon. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. He was the son of Ichabod's brother Ehud, son of Phinehas, the son of the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Baerez and the other Sarah. One cliff stood to the north toward Miknah, the other to the south toward Gisha. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." I'll stop and comment on that sentence there. I don't know if he was thinking about Gideon when he did that, but Gideon the judge had conquered some his enemies, the Midianites, I believe it was. He began with a large number and whittled it down to about 300 men. And so maybe Jonathan's thinking about the time that God saved Israel from the Midianites with just a few men. "Do all that you have in mind," his armor-bearer said. "Go ahead, I am with you, heart and soul." Jonathan said, Come on, then we will cross over toward them and let them see us. If they say to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands." So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. "Look," said the Philistines, "the Hebrews are coming out of the holes they were hiding in." The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, Come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson." So Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Jonathan climbed up, using his hands and feet, with his armor-bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer followed and killed behind him. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor-bearer killed some 20 men in the area of about half an acre. Then panic struck the whole army. Those in the camp had fled, and those in the outposts and raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. Saul's lookouts at Gibeah and Benjamin saw the army melting away in all directions. Saul said to the men who were with him, "Muster the forces and see who has left us." When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor-bearer who were not there. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God." At that time, it was with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the Philistine camp increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Then Saul and all the men assembled and went to the battle. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines and had gone up with them to their camp went over to the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined the battle in hot pursuit. So on that day the Lord saved Israel, and the battle moved on beyond Beth-aven. Now the Israelites were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, "Cursed be anyone who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies." So none of the troop tasted food. The entire army entered the woods, and there was honey on the ground. When they went into the woods, they saw the honey oozing out. Yet no one put his hand to his mouth because they feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard that his father had bound the people with the oath. So he reached out the end of his staff that was in his hand, and dipped into the honeycomb. He raised the hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Then one of the soldiers told him, "Your father bound the army under a strict oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats out food today.' That is why the men are faint." Jonathan said, "My father has made trouble for the country. See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little of the honey? And how much better it would have been if the men had eaten today some of the plunder they took from their enemies. Would not the slaughter of the Philistines have been greater?" That day, after the Israelites had struck down the Philistines from Mizpah to Ajalon, they were out exhausted. They pounced on the plunder, and taking sheep, cattle, and calves, they butchered them on the ground and ate them together with the blood. Then someone said to Saul, "Look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that has blood in it." "You have broken faith," he said. "Roll a large stone over here at once." Then he said, "Go out among the men and tell them, each of you having your cattle and sheep, and slaughter them here and eat them. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat and blood still in it." So everyone brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he had done this. Saul said, let us go down and pursue the Philistines by night and plunder them till dawn, and let us not leave one of them alive. "Do whatever seems best to you," they replied. But the priest said, "Let us inquire of the God here." So Saul asked God, "Shall I go down and pursue the Philistines? Will you give them into Israel's hands?" But God did not answer him that day. Saul therefore said, "Come here, all you who are leaders of my army, and let us find out what sin has been committed today. As surely as the Lord who rescues Israel lives, even if the guilt lies with my son Jonathan, he must die." But not one of them said a word. Saul then said to all the Israelites, "You stand over there. I and Jonathan, my son, will stand over here. Do what seems best to you," they replied. Then Saul prayed to the Lord, the God of Israel, "Why have you not answered your servant today? If the fault is in me or in my son Jonathan, respond with Urim, but if the men of Israel are at fault, respond with Thummim." Jonathan and Saul were taken by lot, and the men were cleared. Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and Jonathan my son," and Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." So Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the end of my staff, and now I must die. Saul said, "May God deal with me, but be it ever so severely, if you do not die, Jonathan." But the men said to Saul, should Jonathan die, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never, as surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the Lord, for he did this today with God's help. So the men rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. Then Saul stopped pursuing the Philistines, and they withdrew to their own land. And Saul assumed rule over Israel. He fought against the enemies on every side, Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. He fought valiantly and defeated the Amalekites, delivering Israel from the hands of those who had plundered them. Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. The name of his older daughter was Merab, and that of the younger was Michal. His wife's name was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the commander of Saul's army was Abner, son of Ner, and Ner was Saul's uncle. Saul's father Kish and Abner's father Ner were sons of Abel. All the days of Saul there was bitter war with the Philistines, and whenever Saul saw a mighty or brave man, he took him for his service. So a rather long chapter, but a story there that I think has several lessons in it. But so this first chapter of the two focuses in large part on Jonathan, Saul's son. And this first battle that's described in chapter 14 was won with God's help against the Philistines, but his father took credit for it. We're going to see a trend here of how Saul's thinking has changed from when he first became a king and now at this time. Jonathan's bravery came from his trust in God to deliver Israel. You can see a couple of the passages where it mentions that it shows Jonathan's trust and confidence and faith in God that he would deliver Israel, not by his power, by Jonathan's power, but by God's power. In this battle, it says that God caused the ground to shake, throwing the Philistines into confusion or panic. I'm assuming that was something like an earthquake, but I don't know that for a fact. But it was something from God. It wasn't from something Jonathan or the Israelites did. And the Philistines went into a panic. In verse 24, it says that the Israelites were in distress. They were in distress because Saul's foolish curse on anyone who ate anything before evening. Now, these men are fighting. They're exerting a lot of physical energy in doing the fighting, and yet they weren't allowed to eat anything. So naturally, they're going to get worn down and tired and faint, as it says. In verse 29, Jonathan said, Saul has caused trouble for the country because of the curse. So Saul makes this curse, which is, in retrospect, very foolish. It didn't really make a lot of sense. So why did he do it? I'm not sure there's a good explanation to why he would make such a curse. He was trying to make sure that he avenged his enemies, and he described them as his enemies, not God's enemies, his enemies. I want to avenge my enemies. And so he's already starting to think very selfishly, very egotistical in his thinking. He's not relying on God. He's thinking, well, I'm such a valiant fighter, I want to avenge my enemies. And this curse just didn't really help anything. Jonathan didn't know about the curse, and so he's hungry. He sees some honey on the ground. He takes a little bit of it and puts it to his mouth with his staff. And it says his eyes brightened, so I guess it gave him some energy, a sugar high, if nothing else. And so he didn't know about it, and so he eats something, and of course violates the curse that Saul had made. And then the people defended Jonathan. Saul was ready to kill his own son because of this foolish curse that he had made. And yet the people around him saw the obvious craziness of that idea or that thing. So they defended Jonathan, which I guess, considering how kings ruled, to defend Jonathan against their father Saul, the king, there could have been some repercussions for them, but they were confident enough to defend Jonathan in this particular instance. And then Saul built an altar, and it says it's the first time that he had done this. Well, that's because that's normally done by the priests or the Levites. That's not normally done by a layman or even a king. And so, we see a lot of altars being built in the Bible. We talked about a couple of weeks ago about how Joshua put some stones on each other in the Jordan River to commemorate what God had done about crossing the Jordan, and then another set of stones in Gilgal to commemorate God's power and his success. And then again, when Jonathan was about to die, he built another monument to remind the people that they had committed themselves to God. So all of those altars were to God, or for God. This one may not have been for God. This one may have been Saul's intentions to build one for himself. I'm not sure. We see later on that he does do that. As I said, we're beginning to see Saul does things for his own glory instead of the glory of God. He doesn't wait for God, but does things his own way. And I use the word arrogance there to describe where he's going and what he's doing. So how often have you seen, I know I've seen a lot of these, men who, or women I guess, who get in roles of leadership and it sort of goes to their head. We use that phrase, it goes to their head. And many times they become arrogant, maybe even narcissistic, and everything is about them. It's not about anyone else. It's all about themselves. They think very, very inward and think very highly of themselves. So I don't think this was unique to Saul. I think we've seen it around. You've probably seen it in your life as I have. For Saul, the battles become his personal vengeance other than something to bring glory to God. I mentioned that earlier. When the people defended Jonathan, it was obvious to them how inappropriate the killing of Jonathan would be when God had delivered Israel through Jonathan. But Saul was willing to do it because of a rash curse that he had made. Everyone seemed to know that the victory came from God, maybe except Saul. Everyone else, it was kind of obvious that the ground shook. This wasn't something that Saul did. The confusion that the Philistines were in wasn't something that Saul did. That all came from God. Everyone seemed to recognize that except him, maybe. Any comments or questions about chapter 14 or about Saul or Jonathan in this particular incident? Anything you'd like to ask or bring up? Point? Okay. Let's go to chapter 15 then. Samuel said to Paul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over the people of Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and just totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Pretty specific there. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, Go away. Leave the Amalekites so that I do not destroy you along with them, but you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs. Everything that was good, these they were unwilling to destroy completely. But everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ear? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? Saul answered, The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. Enough, Samuel said to Saul. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, Saul replied. Samuel said, Although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel. And he sent you on a mission, saying, Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil to the eyes of the Lord? But I did obey the Lord, Saul said. I went on the mission and the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. But Samuel replied, Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them. Now I beg you, forgive my sin and come back with me so that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the hem of his robe, and it tore. Samuel said to him, The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a human being that he should change his mind. Saul replied, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. Then Samuel said, Bring me Agag, king of the Amalekites. Agag came to him in chains, and he thought, Surely the bitterness of death is past. But Samuel said, As your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. And Samuel put Agag to death before the Lord at Gilgal. Then Samuel left for Ramah, but Saul went up to his home in Gibeah of Israel. Until the day Samuel died, he did not go to see Saul again, though Samuel mourned for him. And the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. So, at the beginning of this chapter, God gives a command about destroying the Amalekites. So the Amalekites, if you go back to Exodus chapter 17, when Israel was coming out of Egypt and through the wilderness, the Amalekites attacked shortly after that. And this was the battle, if you'll remember the story, where as long as Moses held his hands up, the fighting would continue in the favor of the Israelites. But if he got tired and his arms would go down, it would go the other way. And so Joshua and Hur held his hands up when they got tired, and they defeated the Amalekites that day. They didn't totally wipe them out or anything, but they won that battle. And so apparently the Amalekites were very wicked people. It's said several times that they were very wicked. And God continues to punish the Amalekites for their wickedness and for their attack against the Israelites, even way back. So he hadn't forgotten. God hadn't forgotten what they did way back there, but they're continuing their wickedness, and in God's wisdom, they needed to be completely obliterated. God asks through Samuel that Saul totally destroy the Amalekites and everything they owned. It was pretty clear. He even said, no sheep, no cattle, everything should be destroyed. And then what happened was Saul and his army in the battle, they won the battle, but they brought back Agag alive, and they kept the best of the sheep and cattle and everything that was good. So Saul is going to use a lot of excuses later. We destroyed everything else, so we mostly obeyed the command, didn't we? I mean, we destroyed most of the people. We just kept Agag, just one. And yeah, but these cattle, we wanted to use those for sacrifices. The men made me do it. The soldiers made me do it. And of course he's king. He can tell the soldiers what to do. So a lot of excuses. And so he disobeyed God's pretty clearly. Saul was willing to obey as long as it suited his own plans and purposes. As long as it was, if it's weak cattle, weak sheep, maybe the worst of the goods and things, we'll destroy those. But if it's good stuff, we want to keep those. He drew a line of what he was willing to do in obedience to God. And it made me think about how we sometimes do the same thing. We're somewhat selective in how we obey God. When it suits us, sometimes we obey, and when it doesn't suit us well, he'll overlook that. He'll turn away from us on that one. But I think that we need to learn a lesson from here about complete obedience to God. We're not perfect, I know that, and we're going to sin, but we need to have complete obedience to God in everything we do. At least that should be our goal. In verse 15, Samuel said to Saul, "Enough." I looked at some other translations and see what it said. One of them said, "Be quiet." Another one says, "Stop." Either way, Samuel had enough of Saul's lies. He didn't want to hear anymore. He had heard enough. He basically says, "Stop. I don't want to hear any more about this." And for the second time, at least that we have in Scripture, Saul has willfully disobeyed God's will. Earlier he had prepared the sacrifice before Samuel got there, even though it was clear that only the priest is supposed to do that. He didn't wait. He got a little nervous because some of his men were deserting him. So now a second time he's disobeyed God willingly. And for the second time, Saul gave some lame excuses to Samuel and therefore to God. I think we sometimes try to make up excuses too when we get a little caught on something, but certainly Saul did that in this case. He even erected a monument to himself, not to God, for the victory. In other words, he said, I won this great battle. I'm now a great warrior. Let's build a monument to myself. Another sure sign of his arrogance, even though he should have known that his victories came from God and not from his own power. Saul was once a modest man. Samuel says that he was once small in his own eyes, is a way to describe that. But it's now a man of self-importance and disobedience to God. You remember when Saul was first made king, he kind of hid among the baggages, and he kept talking about how his tribe was the least of the tribe, and I'm the least of the clans in the tribe. He was very modest. He was self-deprecating, and he was more humble. But now he has lost that humility and has put himself in a position of putting himself in making monuments for himself and being very arrogant. Have you known people who, once they had gained some power, wealth, or prestige, become a totally different person? I've known some of those. I think you probably have too. We see that a lot in celebrities and other people that get some kind of notoriety or power, or maybe a position that's a higher position, and then they become full of themselves and forget where they came from, forget who helped get them there, that sort of thing. But they just become a totally different, and this is what Saul has done, I think. And I think it's something that could happen to us if we're not careful. And so we need to be on guard to remember who is our king, who we get our power from, who we get our strength from, and not from ourselves, but remember where we came, how we got there. So Saul had some excuses. Soldiers made me do it. I was going to use the animals to sacrifice to the Lord. They were both lies disguised as reasons. And if you know any narcissists, you know that they will always blame others for any faults that occur. They're not their own. But Samuel sees through all those, of course, and rejects the lies of Saul. Of course, Saul had already been told by God that Saul had disobeyed him. And God wants living obedience from the heart, not dead animals on the altar. And so the passage that we read a little while ago, one of the very highly quoted passages from 1 Samuel in verse 22. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as much as obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. Those are quoted a lot because a lot of people do go through motions of religion, who go through rituals, but maybe not have their heart. And that was something Jesus even mentions. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but in Matthew 9, he gives a similar message to the Pharisees, who were sacrificing a lot of things down to a tenth of their spices and things. They gave a tenth of everything, and that was sort of a ritual for them, but it wasn't from their heart. It was something that was a requirement that they felt they had to make. The sacrifice he wants is a broken and contrite heart. Again, humility, something Saul had lost. But Samuel is reminding him that that's what God would really prefer, rather than, let's say you were really speaking the truth when you said I was going to bring all that cattle and stuff and we're going to sacrifice it to the Lord. But that's not all of what God wants. God wants your heart, not just your sacrifices. Sacrifice without disobedience, without obedience, is only hypocrisy and empty religious ritual. As well, I was going to mention it earlier. And then the question to us: do we sometimes follow religious ritual rather than showing mercy, having a contrite heart, or giving obedience to God? So what kind of rituals are we talking about today? Well, it could be something as simple as, I go to church and I sit in the pew and I do this or that, that maybe I even teach a class, or maybe I do. There are things that I do that should make me feel religious and obedient to God, when in reality, maybe they're doing it for their own glory. I want to be seen at church. I've seen politicians come to church a lot more often when, right before an election. That's kind of a way of saying, I want to be seen there, and therefore get my votes. But so I think we can be guilty of the same sin ourselves if we're not devoting our hearts and our minds to God and being humble and remembering who God is and what He's done for us. Saul asked Samuel, even after he admitted that he had sinned, to honor him before the elders of the people. I thought that was kind of interesting. He already admitted he sinned, but I want you to go back with me to honor me before the elders of his people. I think that's another thing where he wants to be seen doing something. I think he was more concerned about his reputation and being popular with the people instead of fearing God. I think that could be something we're very guilty of today as well. Be more concerned about our reputation. Well, it would look bad if I don't go to church, or it would look good if I do go to church, from the viewpoint of other people, and that's the motivation for going. So I think this is a very real sin that we can commit today. God and Samuel rejected Saul as king and said that his kingdom would be given to another. We know eventually that's David. Samuel doesn't know who it is at this point. He says it's someone better than you. He does say that. But from this point on, Saul is maybe the king from the standpoint of the ruling of a country, but in God's eyes, he's no longer king, and as well as Samuel. So Saul lost his dynasty, his character, and his throne all at once. And it was a bad day for Saul. Saul also lost a godly friend and supporter. Samuel had been the one that anointed him. He had been the one that supported him. He was one that gave him advice all along the way. And Samuel says he never went to visit Saul again. I think Saul does go and visit Samuel once after this, but Samuel never goes to visit Saul again. So he lost a really important person in his life. And we can do the same thing. We can lose friends and supporters because of our selfishness or arrogance. It happens all the time. And I think humility is such an important characteristic for the Christian. As we imitate Christ, he was one who was the supreme example of humility. He came down from the heaven, came to this earth to die for us, die a cruel death for us. And he did that even though he didn't have to. He did that because he loved us and because he wanted us to have salvation. So that's something we can be thankful for, and we need to imitate him in all we do. So any questions about chapter 15 or 14 for that matter, as we wrap up here?
It's interesting in 20 and 21, he does the same responsibility shift that we saw in Adam and Eve at the beginning.
Yes, blaming somebody else. Yeah, exactly. The comment from was that in these verses that Saul blamed other people, much like the case of Adam and Eve in the creation when they sinned. Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed Satan, you know, they all had somebody else to blame. Good point. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Well, that's all I've got. Have a good day, and thank you for your attention.